My case for permanent daylight savings time. It is March of 2026. Here's a few updates. The United States has been trying to lock the clocks for years now. This all started in Florida in 2018, and it spread to several other states. Here are all the states that would like to have permanent daylight savings time. The states in blue and the states in yellow have either considered permanent daylight savings or considered permanent standard time. Arizona and Hawaii are red because they've been on permanent standard time for at least since 1966, I believe. So, yep. And we can add Texas and Oklahoma to the blue column. They recently passed permanent daylight savings time in those states. But the problem is, a state can do standard time year-round, like Arizona and Hawaii. That's the time you use in the winter. But a state cannot do daylight savings time, the time we use the other 8 months of the year, without Congress. So even though all these states in blue, plus Texas and Oklahoma, have year-round daylight savings time enacted, they still switch back and forth because Congress has to act. But that brings us up to the Sunshine Protection Act, which gets introduced and reintroduced every year. Closest this ever got to passing was in 2022, March of 2022, 4 years ago, when the Senate unanimously voice voted to make daylight savings time permanent. But then the House got cold feet, held it up. Probably the sleep lobby had a lot to do with this, and they just did not vote on it. They ghosted the bill, and that was the end of that, and it never passed. And then, this is actually one of the few things that I agree with Donald Trump on. Donald Trump's a big supporter of making daylight savings time permanent. It's one of the things, though, that he did not accomplish, at least not yet, in his second term as president. Now, I am not a fan of most of Donald Trump's stuff. Most of it, in my opinion, is fascism, but this is not to get political and to Trump bash. This is about something that is bipartisan. So Trump kind of made it confusing. Back in December of 2024, he said he wanted to end daylight savings time. Most people, myself included, thought he doesn't actually mean standard time. He means permanent daylight savings time, like what Marco Rubio and Rick Scott and most of his Republican Party has been fighting for years. And we were right. In March of last year, though, he dropped the issue, saying it was 50-50, and some people want it one way and some people want it the other way. But then in April of last year, he said, yes, we want more light at the end of the day, confirming what I believed and many other believed, which is that he was for permanent daylight savings time the entire time. But the thing about this issue is that it's bipartisan, which is great because it means that there are Democrats like me that support permanent daylight savings time, and I strongly support it. The problem is that it has bipartisan opposition as well. For example, when the Senate made its second attempt at permanent daylight savings time this past October, it was actually not a Democrat, it was Republican Tom Cotton that blocked Republican Rick Scott's Sunshine Protection Act from passing in a voice vote. And so this is an issue a lot of people are divided on, and a lot of this has to do with health. But I want to point out the Stanford research article that says, and they argue that morning light is better for our health and permanent daylight savings time takes all that away. And so that this team found that from a circadian perspective, we made the worst choice. Standard time or daylight savings time would be better than seasonal switching. To be fair, this article argues that standard time is the better way, which is the opposite of what the Sunshine Protection Act does. But it says you'd get 2/3 of the same benefits health-wise on permanent daylight savings time. And then you got the golf world. This is why I'm surprised Trump hasn't done anything about it. He's a golfer and he's a passionate fan of golf, but the golf industry is mainly opposed to permanent standard time. They also support permanent daylight savings time, but there are some people who have concerns about morning darkness in the winter. So that's why this has not been a bigger win, basically. So I'm going to make couple arguments here to conclude for why we should pass the Sunshine Protection Act and permanent daylight savings time. Public opinion polls overwhelmingly show it's more popular. In fact, already a few states have said, okay, we're going to go with standard time because it's the only one that we can make. Tennessee most recently had a bill to go on permanent year-round standard time. That's the opposite of permanent daylight savings time. That'd make it a red state like Arizona or Hawaii, but it's already been shot down. Bill didn't pass. We've seen this play out in state after state. More states than ever now are trying to go to standard time, which unfortunately makes Sleep and Health lobby harder to not pass permanent daylight savings time because they think, oh, standard time is winning. People are coming around. People are seeing the light. And there are a lot of people that just don't want to change the time, so they're okay with standard time. They're like, make either or permanent. And that's what you are seeing. But we also see standard time bill in state after state after state get defeated, largely due to the golf industry. But again, like Utah, for example, last year they had, okay, well, we're right north of Arizona in Mountain Time. Let's make standard time permanent. We tried permanent daylight savings. We can't get it without an act of Congress. So let's make standard time permanent. And what happened? Golf industry lobbied hard against them and the bill failed. So far, same with California, they were well on their way to making standard time permanent. That's the winter setting. And of course, all the outdoor enthusiasts and the California Association of Golf came out against it and said, no, 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 no. So what happened in Washington is the sleep industry came out against permanent daylight savings time and kept that from passing nationally. But at the individual states, it was overwhelmingly the golf industry or outdoor recreation industries that came out against permanent standard time. I think two things will need to happen in order to get the whole country on permanent daylight savings time. First of all, health will have to stop fighting it. And I know that seems like a crazy stretch, but health will have to realize that, okay, well, maybe standard time is healthier. We'll concede to that. But if you're getting 2/3 of the same health benefits on permanent daylight savings time simply by not switching the clocks, then why not stick with daylight savings time year-round? At least why are we fighting this bill that would end the worst system of all, which is switching the clocks back and forth? But the other thing that would have to happen is the golf industry, which fights hard against permanent standard time, but is relatively okay with the status quo of 8 months of daylight savings time, they'd have to fight just as hard for permanent daylight savings time as they do against permanent standard time. So anyway, one thing that could move the needle and give us a push on the permanent daylight savings time thing is up here in Canada. Canada allows individual provinces to do permanent standard time or permanent daylight savings time. In the U.S., only permanent standard time, which Arizona and Hawaii do, is allowed. But British Columbia recently said, we're not changing our clocks again. We are staying sprung forward on permanent daylight savings time starting this year. Yukon's already done this. Saskatchewan's already done this. And Alberta is considering doing this. And so these are all provinces that have picked permanent daylight savings time, not standard time, because people like their afternoon and evening light. So I want to go with one more argument that I hear all the time from the standard time community that says, no, we don't want this. And the argument is, we tried it. And that seems to be the experiment that has haunted this country for over 50 years. It's over 50 years since 1974. This is not the same country, but I hear it all the time. Well, we tried it under Richard Nixon in the energy oil embargo of 1974. So here's a little history of what happened there, why it didn't work, and why I think it could work today. So the story is we fell back in October. Back then we were used to 6 months of daylight savings time. Fell back in October of 1973. Then Richard Nixon had us spring forward January 6, 1974, for a 2-year experiment to do daylight savings time all year round to save energy during the oil embargo. Well, this didn't work too well because in January and February of 74, there were all these stories about school kids at the buses in the dark and kids getting hit by the buses, and it's so dark in the morning and it's not light till after 8 in the morning in some places, and this is a terrible idea. I can't believe we did this. Well, 1974 goes through, Richard Nixon gets impeached and resigns, Gerald Ford becomes president, and the 2-year experiment is repealed. People don't like the thought of another winter of dark mornings, so Congress overrules the ruling, and in October of 74, the clocks go back as normal. They did spring forward in late February of 75, because it was the second year of the experiment, but during the 4 darkest months of the year, we had standard time again. So I'll tell you what my opinion is about that. Well, first of all, people were used to daylight savings time then from the last Sunday in April to the last Sunday in October. Now people are used to it from the second Sunday in March to the first Sunday in November. So we're used to having daylight savings start a whole lot earlier than it used to back in the 70s. And I would also argue that springing forward in January was a terrible idea. Because think about it, we just had Christmas and New Year's, the holidays, people are coming back to work, kids are going back to school, and then all of a sudden, boom, you lose an hour of sleep and it's dark till 8 in the morning. Of course that experiment did not work. But the way the Sunshine Protection Act would do it is that we would spring forward in March at the usual time, that like we've been doing for 20 years, and then we would simply not fall back in November. Nobody would know the difference. Eventually, yeah, we'd have sunrises after 8 o'clock in the middle of the winter, but we would ease into those gradually with no sudden time shifts. And then we'd ease back into spring and get the nice long days that we have now. And the sunset times, it depends on where you are within a time zone, but the sunset times would stay an hour later, which at least where I live in the western edge of Eastern Time, Greenville, South Carolina. Our earliest sunset's 5:15, and we would be at 6:15 sunsets in December on permanent daylight savings, which I would much prefer. Where people would really like would be places like Alabama and Middle Tennessee, places that are on the eastern end of time zones where their earliest sunsets are like 4:30, and permanent daylight savings would push them to 5:30. Now, of course, on the flip side, the sunrise times would also be pushed an hour later, which is why this is controversial. So in the dead of winter, our worst sunrise in Greenville is 7:40 in the morning, and this would push it to 8:40 in the morning, which would be rough. That's where the whole argument about kids waiting on buses in the dark comes from. But again, when we get to the end of October and the beginning of November, it's like, okay, mornings are dark, but we still got some evening light. And I hate the fall back change. Yeah, you get an hour back in the morning, but losing that hour in the evening is horrible. And then by March, it's like, well, okay, now our days are getting longer, yay. But then it's like daylight savings time, yay, all that much more new light. But there is one other bill in Congress, and that would be a split the difference bill, which I hear a lot of people say, well, let's just spring forward a half hour and leave it. I like that. I'd go with that. In fact, that would work out great here. Our earliest sunset would not be 6:15, but it wouldn't be 5:15 either. We'd get the sun out till 5:45 here on the shortest days of the year, and on the longest, it wouldn't stay out till 8:45 anymore, but it'd stay out till 8:15, which is pretty darn good. I like split the difference. There is a bill, Stubbe of Florida didn't pass it, but he introduced it, and it would split the difference. Daylight compromise time, he called it. I'm all for that. Another idea I've proposed, although the downside to splitting the difference is that these time zones would now be on the half hour compared to the rest of the world. But my proposal, and I admit, South Carolina, we'd be in standard time on my proposal, and that would be if you're on the western end of your time zone, don't spring forward, because you have pretty good evening light and not such good morning light. But places like New England, places like Central Time east of the Mississippi, places like Nevada, they would move to the next time zone east. This would become Eastern Time in here. Nevada would be Mountain Time, like Arizona Standard Mountain Time, and New England would be Atlantic Time. That'd be the equivalent of permanent daylight savings time on the eastern ends of time zones and permanent standard time everywhere else. And basically that would keep us with some morning light, but also get rid of the places where the sun sets well before 5 and it's depressing, like here and here and here, for example. But anyway, all neat ideas. Personally, I hope we can put the whole country on permanent daylight savings time. I think it would work in the 2020s. This is not the 1970s. I don't think it would fail like it did in 74. I think we'd do it a much smarter way by staying forward and simply not falling back. We wouldn't January forward like we did in 1974. I think people would appreciate the extra hour of light at the end of the day, especially in the dead of winter, even if it did mean darker mornings. And in terms of states' rights, states would still have the option to opt out. Arizona and Hawaii, nothing would change. They would remain on permanent standard time all year round, as they have always done. This would only affect the 48 states that currently switch back and forth. We would spring forward permanently, and I think it's a great idea. Other states might, like Indiana, might permanently fall back to standard time or join Central Daylight Savings Time, which is the same as Eastern Standard Time. And so that could work. Individual states could opt out. There was an amendment to do that. So I don't really know what's holding Congress up other than a lot of health and sleep people. And even if health is your concern, it's a little bit of a strange one because, permanent daylight savings time would see 2/3 of those same circadian benefits that permanent standard time would. It is true that people need morning light, and you can hear all the health people rant and rail about that. But that being said, a consistent time would solve a lot of the health issues that we have with the back and forth, like the heart attacks after the March change or the seasonal depression after the November change. Be great to get rid of those time changes. Standard time is not popular and costs a lot of golf and outdoor recreation industries thousands and thousands of dollars. Not to mention, most people consider it seasonal depression time. And you've seen it play out in state after state where State House tries to pass standard times they can, and then the people say, no, we want daylight savings time. We like our evening light. So I feel like, and plus we have daylight savings 8 months of the year. I feel like permanent daylight savings is absolutely the way to go. And even if you're concerned about health, it's healthier than the current system. I'll concede that it's not as healthy as permanent standard time, but it's healthier than back and forth because it's a consistent time. And it's got all the economic benefits and the social benefits. And one more thing, if you're really concerned about kids in the dark or any of that, people can always adjust their schedules. Schools can start later. There's amendments that can be made. But I really hope that we pass the Sunshine Protection Act and get rid of our 4 months of standard time in the winter and have year-round daylight savings time nationwide. I'm rooting for you, Congress, to do this. And like I say, I'm not a big fan of Donald Trump, but I'd be thrilled if he could get this done somehow or another. Still fingers crossed that it'll happen. And I think it will. I don't think it's going to happen this year or anytime super soon. But if you give it 5 or 10 years, I think we'll put the whole country on permanent daylight savings time eventually. The standard time people are fighting hard against it. Health industry is fighting hard against it. But I still think that's the direction we're heading. And if you look at history, 87, we moved daylight savings time from 6 months to 7 months. 07, we moved it from 7 months to 8 months. Ever since 07, I've been arguing we just need to have permanent daylight savings. 07 was my freshman year in college, and I remember it was the first March where we had daylight savings. We used to not spring forward till April, and I loved it. Having it light till 7:30, 8 o'clock in the middle of March on spring break just made it feel like we were that much closer to summer. Hopefully we'll get it year-round, and we will end those really depressing early sunsets of winter. One other point, winter's still going to be winter, days are still going to be short, and the sun is still going to set early. But if I had to choose between daylight being 7:30 to 5:30 in December or 8:30 to 6:30, I'd say it's worth it to have the 8:30 sunrise if it stays light till 6:30 in the evening, especially since I'm at work anyway. To me, morning light isn't that important. Now, I admit I work from 6 to 2:30, so I'm used to going to work in the dark and getting up in the dark, and it's that way on standard time, too. At 6 a.m. in Greenville, South Carolina is dark from November to March, regardless of how you set the clocks. So to me, it makes no difference if the sun's rising at 7:30 or 8:30, but it makes a huge difference if the sun is setting at 5:30 or 6:30, and I much prefer the 6:30 sunsets. So I am for permanent daylight savings time all the way. I hope these arguments make sense. Main arguments being, we tried it in 74, but we January forwarded. I think it would be a much smoother transition to just not fall back, which is what the Sunshine Protection Act does. States' rights, Arizona and Hawaii are unaffected. Any other state can do standard time if they don't like the super late sunrises. And finally, health-wise, 2/3 of the same benefits as permanent standard time would have. And health is just one aspect. Economically, businesses will do better, retail will do better. It's good for golf, it's good for outdoor recreation. It seems to me it's a no-brainer. So, to conclude, come on, Congress, that's my speech. Let's do this. Pass that Sunshine Protection Act and have daylight savings time year-round.